The rusted metal groaned beneath Kaylin's boots as she crept across the abandoned factory's catwalk, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. 3 stories below, a pack of 17 zombies shuffled aimlessly through the debris-strewn floor, their decaying bodies casting grotesque shadows in the pale moonlight filtering through shattered windows. She pressed her eye to the scope of her crossbow, counting each shambling figure with the methodical precision of someone who had learned that one miscalculation meant death. Visual confirmed, she whispered into her throat mic, her voice barely audible even to herself. 17 hostiles, standard formation. No runners detected. The crackling response came from Zephyr, hidden somewhere in the building's electrical room. Copy that, K. Thermal shows clear corridors to the east. Valdris is in position at the loading dock. Kaylin allowed herself a thin smile. After 18 months of surviving together, their small group had evolved into something resembling a military unit, though none of them had asked for this war. The world had simply ended one Tuesday morning when the first reports of the infected started flooding every news channel, and by Thursday, there were no more news channels to watch. Now, nearly 3 years later, they had learned that brute force was a luxury they couldn't afford. In a world where ammunition was more precious than gold and every gunshot could attract dozens more infected, intelligence was their only weapon. She adjusted her position, studying the zombies' movement patterns. These weren't the fresh infected that still retained some muscle memory and coordination. These were the degraded ones, the survivors of multiple winters whose nervous systems had deteriorated to the point where they could barely maintain basic locomotion. That made them slower but also more unpredictable. A fresh infected might chase prey in a straight line, but these ancient ones could suddenly change direction without warning, following some phantom scent or sound that existed only in their rotting brains. Naya, status report, Kaylin subvocalized. Perimeter secure, came the reply from their medic, positioned at the building's main entrance. But we've got maybe 2 hours before the next patrol cycle brings them back this way. The factory had been their target for weeks. Intelligence gathered from other survivor groups suggested it contained a cache of medical supplies and preserved food that could sustain them through the harsh winter months ahead. But reaching it required passing through what the survivors called a dead zone, an area so heavily infested that even the military had abandoned it during the early evacuation attempts. Kaylin checked her watch. The plan was elegantly simple, the kind of psychological warfare that had kept them alive when stronger groups had fallen to mindless aggression. They would use the zombies' own instincts against them, creating a distraction that would draw the pack away from their objective while leaving escape routes open. It required perfect timing and absolute trust in each other's abilities. Zephyr, initiate Phase 1, she commanded. 2 floors below, she heard the soft hum of electromagnetic interference as Zephyr activated one of his homemade devices. The tech specialist had been an electronics engineer before the outbreak, and his ability to jury-rig equipment from salvaged components had saved their lives more times than Kaylin could count. The device would emit a high-frequency sound, barely audible to human ears but irresistible to the infected. The effect was immediate. The zombies' heads turned in unison toward the eastern corridor, their movements becoming more agitated as they detected the signal. One by one, they began shuffling toward the sound, their groans echoing through the cavernous space. Beautiful, Valdris whispered over the comm. The former military engineer had initially scoffed at their subtle approach, preferring the direct methods that had served him during his deployment overseas. But he had learned, as they all had, that the old rules no longer applied. This was a different kind of war, one where the enemy felt no fear, knew no pain, and would never stop hunting until every last human heart stopped beating. Kaylin waited until the last zombie disappeared into the eastern corridor before signaling the all-clear. As she descended from her vantage point, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by the infected, she had learned to sense their presence like a sixth sense, but by something else. Something that understood their tactics well enough to remain hidden while they executed their carefully planned operation. The medical supplies were exactly where their intelligence had indicated, sealed in sterile containers that had somehow survived the chaos of the initial outbreak. Kaylin ran her fingers over packages of antibiotics and surgical equipment, items that represented months of extended survival in a world where a simple infection could mean death. But as she loaded the precious cargo into their reinforced backpacks, her mind kept returning to that sensation of being observed. "Something's not right," she murmured as Zephyr emerged from the shadows, his pack laden with electronic components he had salvaged from the factory's control systems. "Define not right," he replied, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. Despite the harsh realities of their existence, Zephyr maintained an almost academic curiosity about their situation, treating each encounter with the infected as a puzzle to be solved rather than a horror to be endured. Kaylin paused her packing, listening to the subtle sounds that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The distant groaning of zombies following Zephyr's electronic lure, the whisper of wind through broken windows, the soft footfalls of Valdris maintaining his watch position. But underneath it all, she detected something else, the deliberate rhythm of controlled breathing that suggested another living human. "We're not alone," she said, her hand moving instinctively to the knife at her belt. Valdris's voice crackled through their comms. "Confirm. Movement detected on the north perimeter. Single individual, moving with purpose. Not infected." The team had encountered other survivors before, and the meetings rarely ended well. In a world without laws or social contracts, human nature had revealed its ugliest aspects. Some survivors had formed communities based on cooperation and mutual aid, but others had devolved into predatory bands that viewed weaker groups as resources to be exploited. Kaylin's team had survived this long by avoiding contact with other humans whenever possible, but sometimes contact was unavoidable. "Naya, fall back to secondary position," Kaylin ordered. "Zephyr, how long before your distraction fails?" "Maybe 20 minutes before they start wandering back this way," he replied, quickly dismantling his equipment. 30 if we're lucky." That wasn't enough time to complete their extraction and reach the safety of their base camp. They would have to deal with this unexpected variable before it compromised their entire operation. Kaylin made rapid calculations, weighing the risks of engagement against the consequences of leaving a potential threat in their operational area. "Valdris, can you get eyes on our visitor without compromising your position?" "Negative. Too much debris between my position and the target. But based on movement patterns, this individual knows what they're doing. Military training, possibly special forces." That information changed everything. A trained operative could track them back to their base camp, or worse, they could be advance reconnaissance for a larger hostile group. But engaging in combat would create noise that would draw every infected creature within a 2-mile radius. They needed a solution that eliminated the threat while maintaining their tactical advantage. "New plan," Kaylin announced. "We use our observers' expertise against them. Zephyr, can you modify your device to create multiple signal sources?" "Give me 5 minutes," he replied, already pulling components from his pack. While Zephyr worked, Kaylin studied the factory's layout with fresh eyes. The building's design included multiple levels and interconnected corridors that could be used to create a maze-like environment. If they could manipulate their observers' movement while simultaneously controlling the infected population's location, they could create a scenario where their uninvited guest would be forced to reveal their intentions without direct confrontation. "Valdris, I need you to create the impression that we're evacuating through the south exit," she instructed. Make enough noise to be detected but not enough to attract the infected. Copy that. What about you and Zephyr? We're going to have a conversation with our friend, Kaylin replied, checking her equipment one final time. But first, we're going to make sure they understand that we control this battlefield. The psychological aspect of their strategy was crucial. Most survivors operated under the assumption that superior firepower or numbers determined the outcome of any encounter. But Kaylin's team had learned that controlling information and manipulating expectations were far more effective weapons. By demonstrating their ability to orchestrate complex operations while remaining unseen, they could establish dominance without firing a single shot. As Zephyr completed his modifications, Kaylin felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that preceded their most dangerous operations. But this time, the stakes were different. They weren't just trying to survive another day or secure necessary supplies. They were about to discover whether their hard-earned expertise was sufficient to protect them against whatever new threat had entered their carefully controlled world. The modified signal devices hummed to life at precisely timed intervals, creating a symphony of electromagnetic interference that sent the zombie pack into confused disarray. Kaylin watched from her concealed position as the infected stumbled between conflicting audio cues, their deteriorated nervous systems unable to process the contradictory stimuli. It was a beautiful demonstration of applied psychology, turning the zombies' hunting instincts into a liability rather than an advantage. "Target is moving," Valdris reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Heading toward your position, K." Professional movement, definitely military trained. Through the industrial piping that provided her cover, Kaylin caught her first glimpse of their uninvited observer. The figure moved with the fluid precision of someone accustomed to operating in hostile territory, each step calculated to minimize noise while maintaining optimal sight lines. More concerning was the quality of their equipment, military-grade clothing and gear that suggested access to resources far beyond what most survivor groups could obtain. Female, approximately 5'6", carrying suppressed rifle and sidearm, Kaylin whispered into her throat mic, "Tactical vest suggests body armor. This isn't some desperate scavenger." The woman paused at an intersection of corridors, her head tilting slightly as she analyzed the acoustic chaos created by Zephyr's devices. Even from a distance, Kaylin could see the sharp intelligence in her movements, the way she processed information and adjusted her approach accordingly. This was someone who understood the new rules of survival as well as they did. "She's mapping the sound sources," Zephyr observed from his position near the electrical room. "Trying to determine if our signals are intentional or just random electronic noise." Kaylin made a decision that went against every survival instinct she had developed over the past 3 years. Instead of maintaining concealment or attempting to eliminate the threat, she stepped into the open corridor, her hands visible but ready to draw weapons if necessary. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the factory's acoustics. The woman froze, then slowly turned to face Kaylin. Up close, her features revealed someone in her early 30s with the kind of weathered appearance that came from months of outdoor survival. But her eyes held an alertness that suggested she was far from defeated by their circumstances. "Impressive setup," the stranger said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Kaylin couldn't immediately place. "Most groups would have either run or started shooting by now." "Most groups don't survive 18 months in dead zones," Kaylin replied. "What do you want?" "Information. And possibly an alliance." The woman kept her hands away from her weapons, but Kaylin noticed that her stance remained ready for rapid movement. "My name is Corvus. I represent a group that's been tracking unusual survivor activity in this region." Valdris's voice crackled through the comms. "Multiple contacts approaching from the northeast. Estimate 15 to 20 infected, drawn by something other than our signals." The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Kaylin's mind raced through the implications. Either Corvus was exactly what she claimed to be, or this was an elaborate setup designed to capture or eliminate her team. The approaching zombies would force them to make critical decisions under pressure, exactly the kind of situation that revealed a group's true capabilities and resources. "Your people," Kalen asked, noting how Corvus showed no surprise at the news of approaching infected. No. But I know who's responsible for drawing them here. Corvus glanced toward the factory's main entrance, her expression grim. There's another group operating in this area. They call themselves the Reapers, and they use zombie herds as weapons against other survivors. The revelation sent ice through Kalen's veins. They had encountered evidence of manipulated zombie movements before, but had attributed it to natural herd behavior or environmental factors. The possibility that another human group was deliberately weaponizing the infected represented a threat beyond anything they had prepared for. Prove it, Kalen demanded. Corvus reached slowly into her pack and withdrew a small electronic device. This is a sonic beacon, similar to what your tech specialist is using but designed for long-range herd manipulation. The Reapers plant these near potential targets, then activate them remotely to drive infected populations toward specific locations. Zephyr's voice came through the comms, urgent and precise. "K, I'm detecting a signal source approximately 800 meters northeast. Signal characteristics match the device she's showing you." The sound of approaching infected grew louder, punctuated by the distinctive shuffle of feet through debris. Kalen realized they had perhaps 5 minutes before their position became untenable. But more importantly, she understood that their carefully planned extraction had been compromised from the beginning. Someone had been watching them long enough to set this trap, which meant their base camp location might also be compromised. "If you're telling the truth, then help us deal with this situation," Kalen said, making a tactical decision that would either save or doom her team. "If you're lying, you'll die here with us." Corvus smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features into something almost predatory. "I was hoping you'd say that. My people have been looking for survivors intelligent enough to help us eliminate the Reapers permanently." As the first shambling figures appeared at the factory's entrance, Kalen realized that their world had just become infinitely more complicated. The approaching infected moved with unnatural coordination, their shambling forms arranged in a loose formation that suggested external guidance rather than random wandering. Kalen counted 23 zombies, with more shadows visible beyond the factory's main entrance. Each creature bore the telltale signs of long-term decay, but their eyes held a focus that made her skin crawl. "They're being herded," Corvus confirmed, studying the approaching horde through a compact pair of binoculars. "See how they maintain spacing? That's not natural behavior for degraded infected. Someone's using multiple beacon frequencies to create a controlled approach pattern." Zephyr's voice crackled through the comms with barely contained excitement. "The signal source is mobile. It's moving parallel to the infected, maintaining optimal distance for behavioral control. Whoever's operating it understands zombie neuropsychology better than most scientific researchers did before the outbreak." Valdris had repositioned himself to provide overwatch of their escape routes, but his report was grim. "South corridor is compromised. Detecting movement from at least 2 human operators using the infected as cover. They know exactly where we are." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, but Kalen forced herself to think beyond immediate survival. The Reapers had demonstrated capabilities that posed a threat to every survivor community in the region. If they could weaponize zombie herds with this level of precision, no safe zone would remain secure for long. This was no longer just about extracting medical supplies, it was about preventing a fundamental shift in the balance of power that could doom the remaining human population. "Corvus, what kind of resources does your group have?" Kalen asked, her mind already formulating contingency plans. 47 people, including specialists in electronic warfare, psychology, and zombie behavior modification, Corvus replied without hesitation. "We've been fighting the Reapers for 8 months, but they always stay one step ahead. They're led by someone who understands both military tactics and zombie neurology in ways that shouldn't be possible." Naya's voice interrupted from her position near the perimeter. "Contact. Human operator, approximately 30 meters from my position. Armed with what appears to be a modified sonic device and standard survival gear." The pieces of the tactical puzzle began falling into place in Kalen's mind. The Reapers weren't just using zombies as weapons, they were treating this encounter as a field test of their capabilities. By observing how her team responded to controlled zombie manipulation, they were gathering intelligence that could be used against other survivor groups. It was psychological warfare elevated to an art form. New objective, Kalen announced. We're going to capture one of their operators alive. Zephyr, can you jam their control frequencies? Negative on complete jamming, but I can create interference patterns that will disrupt their coordination, he replied. Give me 30 seconds to recalibrate. Valdris, I need you to create a distraction that draws their attention away from Naya's position. But make it look like we're trying to escape rather than setting up an ambush. Copy that. Preparing to light up the south corridor. Corvus watched their preparations with obvious approval. You fight like people who've been thinking about this problem for years rather than reacting to immediate threats. My superiors will want to meet you. Assuming we survive the next 10 minutes, Kalen replied, checking her equipment one final time. The factory's industrial environment provided numerous opportunities for tactical misdirection. Steam pipes could be ruptured to create visual concealment, electrical systems could be overloaded to produce noise and electromagnetic interference, and the building's multi-level structure offered elevation advantages that could be exploited by someone with proper training. But success would require perfect coordination between team members who trusted each other completely. Zephyr's interference patterns activated with a high-pitched whine that seemed to confuse both the approaching zombies and their human controllers. The infected began milling around uncertainly, their formation dissolving as conflicting signals overwhelmed their deteriorated nervous systems. Through the chaos, Kalen spotted one of the Reaper operatives attempting to restore control with increasingly frantic adjustments to his equipment. Target acquired, she whispered, noting the man's position relative to available cover and escape routes. Valdris's distraction erupted in a shower of sparks and smoke as he overloaded an electrical junction box in the south corridor. The explosion was loud enough to attract every infected creature within a half-mile radius, but it also provided the perfect cover for Kalen to begin her approach toward the Reaper operative. As she moved through the shadows, weaving between industrial machinery and debris, she couldn't help but admire the complexity of the enemy's operation. This wasn't random violence or simple predation, it was a sophisticated attempt to establish dominance through technological superiority and psychological manipulation. The Reapers understood that controlling the infected was equivalent to controlling the future of human survival. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed that other survivor groups would be too desperate and disorganized to mount an effective counterattack. They were about to discover just how wrong that assumption could be. The Reaper operative never saw Kalen coming. Her approach had been textbook perfect, using sound discipline and terrain masking to remain undetected until the critical moment. But as she pressed the muzzle of her pistol against the base of his skull, she realized that capturing him had been almost too easy. Professional operators didn't make mistakes this elementary unless they were either inexperienced or serving as bait for a larger trap. Don't move, don't speak, and definitely don't try to activate any devices, she whispered, relieving him of his sonic control equipment and weapons with practiced efficiency. The man was younger than she had expected, probably in his mid-20s, with the kind of soft features that suggested he hadn't been surviving in the wasteland for very long. His equipment was military-grade but showed signs of recent acquisition rather than long-term use. Most disturbing were his eyes, which held an almost religious fervor that she had learned to associate with the most dangerous type of survivor. Zephyr, I've got their control device, she reported. Can you analyze the signal patterns? Already on it. This is sophisticated stuff, K. The frequency modulation suggests someone with advanced knowledge of neurological research. We're not dealing with scavengers who stumbled onto working equipment. Valdris's position report interrupted their analysis. We've got problems. The infected aren't dispersing like they should. Something's maintaining their focus on this location despite the signal disruption. Through the factory's broken windows, Kalen could see that the zombie horde had regrouped and was pressing toward their position with renewed purpose. But more alarming was the realization that her prisoner seemed unsurprised by this development. He was smiling with the confidence of someone who knew the situation was developing according to plan. "There's a backup system," Corvus said, her voice tight with realization. "The Reapers never rely on single points of failure. Your prisoner is just the visible component of a larger operation." "Naya, status report," Kalen commanded, but received only static in response. "Naya's position has been compromised," Valdris reported grimly. "Detecting multiple human contacts moving toward her last known location. I'm moving to provide support." The tactical situation was collapsing faster than Kalen could adapt to new developments. The Reapers had anticipated their countermeasures and prepared multi-layered contingencies that were now activating in sequence. But worse than the immediate tactical threat was the growing realization that this entire encounter had been orchestrated to eliminate her team as a potential threat to Reaper operations. "They know who we are," she said, the implications becoming clear. "This isn't random predation. They've been watching us long enough to understand our capabilities and develop specific countermeasures." Corvus nodded grimly. "The Reapers don't just eliminate threats. They study them first, learning from each encounter to improve their own methods. Your team's reputation for intelligent survival has made you a priority target." The prisoner spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an unsettling mix of admiration and contempt. "You've been an interesting puzzle to solve. Most groups rely on brute force or simple hiding. But you've been using their own behavior patterns against them, which required observation and analysis. Our researchers were particularly impressed by your electromagnetic manipulation techniques." Kalen felt her blood turn to ice. If the Reapers had been studying their methods for months, then every safe house, every supply cache, and every tactical procedure they had developed could be compromised. Worse, other survivor groups might be targeted using intelligence gathered from observing her team's operations. "How many other groups have you eliminated?" she demanded. 17, so far. Each one taught us something valuable about survivor psychology and resource management. Your group represents the culmination of that research. If we can eliminate you, we'll have demonstrated that intelligence and preparation are insufficient against properly applied scientific methodology." Zephyr's voice crackled through the comms with urgent precision. "K, I'm detecting coordinated movement from multiple directions. This isn't just an elimination attempt, they're trying to capture us alive. The zombie positioning is designed to herd us toward specific extraction points." The factory shuddered as something heavy impacted its exterior wall. Through the windows, Kalen could see that the infected had been joined by human operators wearing protective gear that allowed them to move freely among the zombies. The Reapers weren't just controlling the horde, they were embedded within it, using the infected as mobile cover for their own tactical movements. "Valdris, do you copy?" she called, but received no response. "They're jamming our communications selectively," Corvus observed. "Cutting off your team members one by one to prevent coordinated resistance." The prisoner's smile widened. "Isolation and capture. It's so much more efficient than simple elimination. Living subjects provide ongoing research opportunities." Kalen realized that their only chance of survival lay in doing something completely unexpected, something that would disrupt the Reapers' careful planning through sheer audacity. But as the sound of approaching infected grew louder and the shadows of human operators moved closer to their position, she wondered if their intelligence and preparation had finally met an enemy that understood them better than they understood themselves. The time for subtle tactics had passed. Now they would have to fight for their lives with whatever weapons they could improvise from their rapidly deteriorating situation. The factory's main electrical panel sparked and hummed as Zephyr worked with desperate precision, his fingers dancing across jury-rigged connections that would have made safety inspectors weep. But safety was a luxury they could no longer afford. If Kalen's plan was going to work, they needed to turn the entire building into a weapon that the Reapers couldn't predict or control. 3 minutes until I can overload the main power grid," he reported, sweat beading on his forehead despite the frigid air. "But I can't guarantee the structural integrity of the building afterward." "We'll worry about that if we live long enough," Kaylin replied, her attention split between monitoring their prisoner and tracking the approaching threats through the factory's industrial maze. Corvus had taken position near the loading dock, her rifle trained on the shadows where Reaper operatives moved with confident precision through their zombie escorts. "I count 8 human contacts, possibly more using the infected as mobile concealment. They're not taking any chances with you people." The prisoner laughed softly, a sound that carried disturbing notes of genuine amusement. "You think you can electrocute the entire building and escape in the confusion? We've considered that possibility. The backup generators will maintain essential systems, and our people are equipped with insulated gear specifically designed for electrical hazards." "Good," Kaylin said, checking her weapons one final time. "Then you won't be surprised when that's not actually our plan." The truth was that Kaylin had no idea if her desperate strategy would work. It relied on assumptions about Reaper psychology and tactical doctrine that she couldn't verify without direct observation. But their situation had deteriorated beyond the point where careful analysis was possible. Sometimes survival required leaping into the unknown and hoping that creativity could overcome superior preparation. "Zephyr, when I give the signal, I need you to reverse the polarity on your zombie control frequencies," she instructed. "Reverse them? That could cause massive neurological damage to any infected in range. We're talking about turning them from shambling threats into completely unpredictable berserkers." "Exactly. The Reapers have spent months learning to control zombie behavior. Let's see how they handle zombies that can't be controlled at all." Through the factory's broken windows, the first infected began stumbling through the main entrance, their movements still showing signs of external coordination despite Zephyr's interference. But mixed among them were figures in tactical gear who moved with human intelligence and purpose. The Reapers were using their zombie escorts as both weapons and shields, a tactic that demonstrated their complete confidence in their control systems. "Valdris, if you can hear this, we need covering fire on my signal," Kaylin broadcast on all frequencies, hoping that their communications jamming wasn't complete. The response came not through her earpiece but from the factory's upper levels, where muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as Valdris opened fire on the approaching operatives. His position was exposed and tactically disadvantageous, but it drew attention away from Kaylin's location and forced the Reapers to take cover among their zombie escorts. "Now, Zephyr," she shouted. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The infected within range of Zephyr's modified frequencies convulsed as their already damaged nervous systems received contradictory signals that their deteriorated brains couldn't process. Instead of shambling forward with mechanical persistence, they began thrashing wildly, attacking anything within reach with frenzied desperation. The Reaper operatives found themselves trapped among creatures that no longer recognized the difference between human controllers and potential prey. Their protective gear provided some defense against zombie attacks, but it also slowed their movements and limited their tactical options. Within seconds, their carefully orchestrated operation dissolved into chaos as they struggled to survive among the very weapons they had sought to control. Structural integrity compromised. Zephyr warned as the factory's electrical systems overloaded in cascading failures. Kaylin grabbed their prisoner and hauled him toward the emergency exit, but stopped as she realized that Corvus wasn't following. The other woman had taken up a defensive position near the loading dock, her rifle picking off Reaper operatives with methodical precision. "Leave me," Corvus called. "My people need to know what we learned here. Make sure this intelligence reaches other survivor groups. I'm not leaving anyone behind." Kaylin shouted back. "This isn't about heroics," Corvus replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "The Reapers have been planning something larger than individual elimination operations. My group has intelligence about a facility where they're conducting large-scale experiments. Other survivors need to know about it." The factory shuddered as its electrical systems reached critical overload. Emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging sections of the building into darkness that was broken only by the chaotic movement of infected and the muzzle flashes of desperate combat. Through the chaos, Kalen could hear Valdris calling for extraction, his ammunition running low as he held position against increasing numbers of threats. She made the hardest decision of her life, dragging their prisoner toward the exit while her team members fought to buy them time they couldn't afford to lose. Behind her, Corvus's rifle continued its steady rhythm, each shot representing another Reaper operative who wouldn't threaten other survivor communities. But Kalen knew that their tactical victory was Pyrrhic at best, purchased with losses that could never be recovered. The underground bunker that served as their base camp felt smaller than usual as Kalen sat across from their prisoner, now secured with improvised restraints that Valdris had fashioned from salvaged materials. 3 days had passed since their escape from the factory, but the losses still felt raw and immediate. Naya had been recovered alive but badly injured, her left arm fractured in 2 places from a zombie attack during the chaos. Corvus had not been recovered at all. "You're wondering if it was worth it," the prisoner said, his voice carrying that same unsettling mix of admiration and contempt that had characterized all their interactions. One enemy operative captured in exchange for 1 team member lost and another seriously injured. From a tactical perspective, it hardly seems like a victory. Kalen didn't respond immediately. She had been asking herself the same question since their extraction, weighing the intelligence they had gained against the price they had paid for it. But she was beginning to understand that the real question wasn't about tactical mathematics, it was about the fundamental nature of survival in a world that had abandoned all previous rules. "Tell me about the facility," she said finally. The prisoner's smile faded slightly. "You won't believe me if I tell you the truth. Try me. It's a pre-outbreak government research installation, designed to study infectious disease transmission and behavioral modification. When the outbreak began, the researchers didn't evacuate. They saw it as the ultimate opportunity to test their theories under real-world conditions." Zephyr looked up from the equipment he had been analyzing, his expression grim. "The control frequencies are too sophisticated for improvised technology. Someone with access to classified research and professional laboratory equipment developed these systems." "Exactly. The Reapers aren't survivors who learn to control zombies through trial and error. They're government researchers who have been treating the entire outbreak as an extended experiment. Every survivor group they eliminate provides data points for refining their methods." The implications hit Kalen like physical blows. If the prisoner was telling the truth, then the zombie outbreak might not have been the random catastrophe that everyone assumed. It could have been a controlled experiment from the beginning, with survivor communities serving as unwitting test subjects for behavioral research. "How many people are at this facility?" Valdris asked, his military training evident in the practical nature of his question. "Approximately 200 researchers and support staff, plus an unknown number of test subjects. The facility is designed to be completely self-sufficient, with power generation, food production, and medical facilities that could support operations for decades." Naya spoke for the first time since regaining consciousness, her voice weak but determined. "If they've been studying us for years, they must have detailed files on every survivor group in the region. Intelligence that could be used to save lives if it fell into the right hands. Or doom everyone if it remains under Reaper control," Kalen added. The prisoner's expression shifted to something approaching genuine concern. "You're thinking about attacking the facility directly. That would be suicide. The defenses include automated weapon systems, controlled zombie populations, and terrain that has been modified specifically to channel attackers into predetermined kill zones." "Then we don't attack directly," Kalen said, her mind already working through the tactical possibilities. "We do what we've always done. We use intelligence instead of force." Over the following hours, they extracted detailed information about the facility's layout, security procedures, and operational schedules. The prisoner proved surprisingly cooperative, his scientific curiosity apparently overriding his loyalty to the Reaper cause. But Kalen suspected that his cooperation was itself part of some larger plan that she couldn't yet perceive. As night fell over their underground sanctuary, she found herself standing watch alone, studying star patterns that remained unchanged despite the transformation of the world below. Somewhere in the darkness, other survivor groups were struggling with the same choices her team faced daily. The knowledge they had gained could save lives, but sharing it would require exposing themselves to risks that could destroy everything they had built. "You're thinking about Corvus," Valdris said, joining her at the observation post. "I'm thinking about choices," she replied. "Before the outbreak, we could pretend that individual decisions didn't matter much in the larger scheme of things. But now every choice we make affects the survival of our entire species." She knew the risks when she chose to stay behind. "And she made sure we got the intelligence that other groups need to survive." Kalen nodded, but the weight of leadership felt heavier than ever. Tomorrow they would have to decide whether to share their intelligence with other survivor communities, knowing that communication would expose their location to Reaper surveillance. They would have to choose between safety and responsibility, between protecting themselves and protecting others they had never met. In the distance, she could hear the faint groaning of infected wandering through the ruins of civilization, their voices carrying across the wasteland like a reminder of what they were all fighting to prevent. But for the first time since the outbreak began, she wondered if survival was enough. Perhaps the real question wasn't whether humanity would endure, but whether anything recognizably human would remain after they finished adapting to their new world. The stars offered no answers, but they reminded her that some things remained constant even when everything else changed. Tomorrow would bring new choices and new risks, but tonight they were alive, and that would have to be enough.